Welcome to Questions with Nyime Live. We are live again. It's another Tuesday. It's the third installment of Questions with Nyime Live, which I'm really, again, excited to be doing. So welcome to everybody who will join and also who is going to watch this later. The other two episodes are up on YouTube. If you want to catch up on what we have been talking about. But this week we're going to be talking about vulnerability and relationships, which was something that kind of came off the conversation we had on Friday, where we were talking about online dating. We were talking about modern ideals and how that's affected dating. And there's another question which escapes me right now. But today we're going to be talking about can a relationship survive without vulnerability? And also, what does vulnerability look like in a relationship? So I'm just going to put it here in the chat box. Vulnerability and relationships. I hope everybody is doing well. Hope Tuesday has come around and it has treated you well. My Tuesday has been all right, actually. Had a few things to do on my to-do list. Fortunately, I didn't finish all of them. But that's okay because another day tomorrow. Right. We are pinned, hopefully. Right, so I was gonna wait 30 more seconds for people to jump on and then we'll get into it. Again, I have a situation where my nose is running somewhat, so bear with me. I've got some tissue here. I'm gonna go off screen. Yeah, right. We is back. So I'm gonna wait another 10 seconds or so for anybody to join. And then we're gonna get started. Vulnerability and relationships. This is actually quite a big topic. And yeah, I don't know if we're going to even finish it today. We've got 20 minutes to talk about two questions, sorry. But we'll see what people have to say about the topics in question. But yeah, okay, we'll get started. So, can a relationship survive without vulnerability? That was the first question I asked yesterday. Had quite a number of comments in response to the question, and which I'll go into. But I thought it'd be expedient to talk about, or to actually have a working definition of what vulnerability is, or to be vulnerable is, right? So I decided to go in the dictionary, you know what I mean? I've got another phone here that I'm looking at for notes. So vulnerability, according to the dictionary, is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally, right? So yeah, that's what the dictionary says. I think what I wanted to hone in on was this whole notion of being exposed. And I guess being vulnerable isn't necessarily seen as a positive thing. Again, from the definition, it's saying being exposed to the risk of being harmed or attacked physically or emotionally, right? Somebody else said, actually, when people were responding to the question, that it's a willingness to trust and to be open in the context of relationships. So let's define what relationships we're talking about. So we're talking about friendships, we're talking about committed relationships, and we're talking about marriage relationships. So we're not talking about acquaintance relationships or superficial relationships. We're talking about kind of relationships where you're really invested emotionally. You've invested your time, your energy, your emotions, and everything else. It's not a relationship that's here today and gone tomorrow, essentially. So I know when I asked that question, most people actually said no. They said no, in terms of if a relationship can survive without vulnerability. I'm inclined to agree with that. But again, I'm open to the conversation. And there was somebody that responded and said, actually, a relationship can survive without vulnerability. And so I was like, oh, I'm interested in hearing, your perspective. So the person said, was along the lines of that is not a relationship. Sorry, that is not why a relationship exists, right? So it can survive without it. Vulnerability can be linked to various things, communication, or, your kind of comfortability or your comfort in expressing how you feel about something to somebody. But then he was like, it can also open up a can of worms. It can be a negative thing, basically. And when you talk about men generally don't find it easy to open up, like women, for example. Don't find it easy to open up, like women, for example. And so they might want to deal with things themselves and might not want to be vulnerable. And that's okay. That's actually okay. So I found that interesting because I'm like, there's quite a few things that I drew from that. Obviously, the relationship between vulnerability and men and also women. Women are, I guess, generally more inclined to express themselves, express their feelings, express what's going on, maybe more likely to be vulnerable in that sense, open up, right? And yeah, whereas men generally, they kind of might bottle things up. Obviously, it's not all men we're talking about here, because there can be some men who are more expressive, but generally, like, they're not necessarily inclined to open up like that. So I found that was interesting. But then also the aspect of vulnerability not always being a good thing, because even if you're talking about exposure always carries with it a level of risk. And I think that when you're being vulnerable, you'd like to believe that you're being vulnerable with somebody or in a space or environment that can handle that vulnerability, that can carry, that has the capacity to carry that vulnerability, whatever it is. And so I think sometimes when people have a bad experience of vulnerability, I think part of it might be that you have an experience of being vulnerable in a space that wasn't conducive for that. Maybe you misread, like maybe someone that you were friends with, you misread whether they could handle the capacity of what you would share, basically. And because they couldn't handle it, it was a negative experience for you. And that's what happened to me. Like, being vulnerable for me was not something that I had positive experiences with. So I feel like once you put yourself out there, or you expose, or you reveal, and it doesn't work out, it can make you even more guarded. It can make you put even more walls up. And then somebody else comes along. If you get into a relationship now, and it's a long-term relationship, they have to kind of work at building trust in order for those walls to come down, in order for those barriers to come down. And that's not easy. It's actually not an easy thing. And I think many people have that experience where, like, it's not a positive thing. It's not a positive thing. And again, in the definition, it doesn't strike me as a positive thing. So yeah, I think that, vulnerability in relationships, in terms of people's relationship with it, is different. One of the things I said in response to what I just talked about with when somebody said that the relationship could survive, was, do you think that if you're in a long-term relationship, or if you're in a marriage relationship, like, from a biblical perspective, marriage is where the two become one, right? And the two become one. I think that does require intimacy, and intimacy, something we're going to talk about in the next session, but intimacy, I do believe, requires a level of vulnerability. There has to be a level of exposure of self. Like, you can't, I don't think it works to have barriers up, but then again, it could be what people value and also generationally as well. But I think for two become one, part of that is intimacy. And again, part of intimacy is being vulnerable, is opening yourself up to somebody. But hopefully that person is somebody that you can trust. And that person is somebody that, you know, has earned the right to kind of handle you and see you exposed, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think it's a great question. I really do. And I think somebody else said, when they responded to this, so a large group of women said that vulnerability was something that was necessary in a relationship for it to survive. And so I remember asking someone to elaborate, and they said that they don't think it can survive without vulnerability, but then also the foundation is honesty, and you have to be honest with yourself in order for you to be honest with somebody else. In order for you to be vulnerable with somebody else, you have to be honest with yourself first. And I think that's a really good point. I think it's a great point, because I think if you're not able to be honest with yourself, if you're not able to dive deep with yourself, if you're not able to ask yourself the hard questions, do you know what I'm trying to say? Then how can you do that with somebody else? I feel like in a relationship, if you've got somebody that loves you and cares for you and is committed to you, I believe that if they notice that, they'll help you in that area, because perhaps you've just gone through life not necessarily even knowing that you weren't honest with yourself, not knowing that you didn't really sit down and get to the nitty gritty. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Because I think relationships expose us. That's what they do. Expose us. Like, you know, being married, I can honestly say that having a husband exposes me. Like, it really just brings out every part of who I am. And that's tough at times, because, you know, again, I struggle with vulnerability. So it's like, you know, you don't want to like necessarily be as exposed, but then it's like, you know, this is somebody that loves you and is committed to you. And so by virtue of that, it means that, you know, over time, hopefully you are able to, you know, expose yourself to this person. Do you know what I mean? So just bear with me one moment, guys, because I have some visitors here. I'm live. Can you take that out, please? Thank you. No, can you take that out, please? Can you take that out, please? Thank you. No, wait. Can you, Nathaniel? Can you please go? I'm live right now. Sorry about this, guys. Children coming in when I'm live. No. Can you please, Nathaniel? Can you please that way, please? Thank you. Sorry about this, guys. Hi, welcome to all of you that have joined. Welcome to all of you that have joined. Yes, I had my son come in whilst I'm live. This is why I know they're normally in bed, but it's holiday. So anyway, welcome to the live, Nathaniel. Oh gosh. Anyway, here we are. So yeah, I don't even know where I am now. Like, I've lost myself. But yeah, I think I'll talk about marriage and marriage relationships and how marriage can be a mirror. So when it comes to vulnerability, if it's something that you've struggled with in the past, like I did, it can take a while. It can take a while, because if you don't even realize that maybe you weren't honest with yourself, if you don't realize that you weren't going deep enough with yourself, then I think relationships like marriage can help bring that to the fore. I also think it's about what people value as well. Because I remember talking to my mum about this topic, and she was just like, it's not that big of a deal. If someone isn't like overly sharing and overly vulnerable, like, you know, it is, I think there's a level of respect that is afforded to the person, whereby if they don't want to talk about something or share something, then it's okay. And so, yeah. that's kind of that was kind of her sentiment. I think it's a good thing, you know, if you can, like, over the course of your relationship, build that level of trust and that level of openness. I think for marriage specifically, to becoming one, I think that it's a beautiful thing. It's a benefit. I do think it's a benefit. It's a benefit to grow together, to become more, to become closer and closer to oneness. I think vulnerability is necessary for that. It's so key to be able to challenge yourself on the things you're vulnerable about. Explore it with yourself first, so that's easier to explore it in a relationship. I absolutely agree. And I think that, again, sometimes you just don't even know that that's the case until somebody brings it up, until you're in a relationship and it comes up. But yeah, I do think that if you are triggered by anything, I do think it's important for you to explore that for yourself first. Like, why am I triggered about this? What does this unearth for me? You know, is there trauma behind this, or whatever it is? I think sitting with yourself and seeing yourself almost like a separate person to you, I think is great. Because I was thinking about this the other day, that like sometimes, you know, we'll tell ourselves, okay, we're going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this. You have all this list of things you're going to do, but you don't do it on a regular basis. So you're teaching yourself not to trust yourself, because you say you're going to do something, but then you don't do it. But then because you are you almost think that you don't have to give that the regard to yourself that you give to somebody else. Does that make sense? So I think absolutely what you're saying, Rashida, you have to be able to challenge yourself on the things that you're vulnerable about. Explore it with yourself first, yeah, so that it's easy to explore it in a relationship. I think vulnerability when it comes to communication, sometimes, you know, I'll talk about myself. I think my husband was the one that kind of revealed to me that I could be quite defensive when I am responding, if that makes sense. So less listening, more defensive, and so more on the attack, I guess. And so over time I've had to like really explore that with myself, like, why am I so quick to, you know, defend, as opposed to kind of just, you know, relax, take in what's being said and then move forward. And I don't always agree with that I don't always agree with that assessment, if I'm being completely honest. But it did require me to, again, to be open, you know, with myself, and actually say, okay, why am I not able to kind of really dial down how I feel about something? Why is my first instinct to kind of protect myself? Do you know what I mean? And so that's something that I've had to, you know, work on over time. But I think, yeah, being honest about how you feel about things, I think is important for communication. I think when it comes to communication, like, yeah, honesty. I think honesty is the core of it, really, is what I'm trying to say. is honesty is at the core of it. And so I think that's really important. It's important to be vulnerable in conversation, in communication. I think good communication is something that enables a relationship to thrive. I think sometimes, for example, confrontation, not everybody is good with confrontation. A confrontation does require you to be vulnerable. And so if you're not good with confrontation, or you're confrontation averse, it can be difficult because you're not willing to be vulnerable about how you feel about something. So if you're confrontation averse, then you might actually psych yourself out and think, okay, actually maybe it's better for me not to talk about this because I want to keep the peace, or it's better for me to you know, just turn a blind eye to it, or whatever it is. But I think that confrontation can be difficult because we have to be vulnerable, because we have to tell somebody, actually, no, you did this and it affected me this way. You know, we want to kind of put up these masks and facades, and, you know, that doesn't work. I think in a committed friendship, a committed relationship, you know, in a marriage, I don't think it works for us to kind of pretend. You know what I mean? Having said that, I do think that we pick our battles wisely. I do think it's good to discern whether there is capacity for somebody to receive the vulnerability. If someone is always in a victim mentality, for example, if somebody is not willing to look at what they've done, do you know what I'm trying to say? Then I think that it may not always be easy to confront that person about whatever it is. And so that there's that element to it as well. Rashida, how can we explore vulnerability outside of a relationship? How can we explore vulnerability outside of a relationship? I think it would be friendships, to be honest with you. It would be friendships. I think it depends on the context and it depends on the situation at hand. But I think that vulnerability for me, because it's about exposure and exposure involves risk, I do think that it should be in friendships whereby there's a level of commitment there. You've kind of been able to assess the fruit of that person, and your relationship is strong enough to handle that. I just think being wise with it is very, very important. And I talked about this at the start, actually, your environment being a safe space for you to be vulnerable. And it depends on what you want to be vulnerable about as well. I think that depends. I don't know if I believe in just bearing your soul. I don't know if I believe in that. I do think that there's a place to kind of have something as a treasure for yourself. I mean, not hiding anything as such, but having something as a treasure for yourself, if that makes sense. We're talking about, for example, if you get into a relationship with somebody, they want to know certain things that happened before you were in a relationship with them, like past relationships and your history in that regard. And I don't necessarily think that is necessary. I feel like people can easily be like, the past is the past, I'm moving forward now. It's not something I have to hold on to. It's not something I have to keep in my rear view or anything like that. As in rear view, as in looking at it, turning back to look at it. But some people might require that. I don't necessarily feel that it's for me to bear every little thing that's happened to me. You must now know it and now put it on your head. I don't think it's necessarily that. But I think that moving forward in a relationship, for it to be successful, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a committed relationship, whether it's a marriage, I do think that there does need to be a level of openness and there has to be a level of trust that you have with that person. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any suggestions of how you can explore it outside of a relationship, as in a romantic relationship, I'm assuming you mean? Because I think the only thing I'm thinking about is friendships, committed friendships, people that are not even like Jonathan David type friendships, because they're like covenant relationship. I mean, if it needs to be that, it needs to be that. But friendships that have stood the test of time. So I think that perhaps those friendships are the best ways to explore vulnerability. I think it's good, I did just touch on this, but it's good to be able to share if you have an issue about something that's happened that's offended you. I think those are ways that you can explore it. And obviously if you're in community will expose certain things. You're dealing with people, no one's perfect, people will trigger you in different ways. Yeah, I agree. I think friendship is the best place. But then again, what if people are not good with friendships? They don't have a lot of friends. They have acquaintances. They don't really have friends like that. I really don't know, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think it's 8:55. Wow, time is really flying. What was I gonna? So the next question was actually, what does it look like in relationships? Which is what we were kind of talking about. Vulnerability, depending on what we're talking about, if it's communication, if it's, I think a lot of the times it is to do with communication though, isn't it? But in the context of communication, if you needed to express yourself about something that's bothering you, if you needed to confront somebody about something that they may have done or said, these are ways that I think that we can be honest and be true to ourselves. I think that there are tools that we have to develop, and I think it comes in maturity. You have to develop the ability to say, actually, this is how I feel. Just own it. You have to own, okay, this is how I feel. And so if this is how I feel, I need to communicate that. Do you know what I'm trying to say? If something's been bothering me for a while, it's not like it's just something that's come up, but if something's been bothering me for a while, or something keeps happening, someone keeps doing something and it keeps affecting me, it keeps bothering me, then I probably do need to talk to them about it. So owning my feelings, and then actually, you know, getting in touch with that person and saying, okay, can we have a conversation? Do you know what I mean? I don't think confrontation necessarily has to be a big thing. Sometimes I think the word just feels so heavy at times that it's difficult to not see it as something that could just really just blow up out of all proportion. But I think that it's owning how you feel about something and deciding, okay, actually, maybe I need to talk to this person about this. I think there's a level of freedom within yourself, like, you know, loving yourself completely. I think self-love is a big part of it. Self-worth is a big part of it, because I think that there's people that you probably know, people in your life that you think to yourself, wow, they're just so carefree. Do you know what I mean? They just don't care. Like they really don't consider anybody else's opinion as greater than their own. Like they really kind of just allow themselves to be themselves. And I think that helps with vulnerability as well, where you are able to be free with yourself. You own who you are, you know, you own your strengths, you own your weaknesses, you own your habits, your quirks, all these things. You're just you. I think you thrive because you're just you. And I think maybe that lends itself to vulnerability, or it being easier for you to be vulnerable. There's another thing that came to mind, actually. I was reading recently about attachment styles. So attachment styles is to do with how it's to do with childhood and your relationship with your parents or your family. So they have the secure attachment style, they have the anxious attachment style, the avoidant attachment style, and I think there's fearful avoidant or something like that. But anyway, I'm not like a psychologist, so I don't know. But basically your relationship with your parents, like how that sets you up for life. You know, apparently a secure attachment style is where you know you're loved, you know your parents are safe, like they're a safe space for you. So it's easier for you in relationships because, you know, it's easy for you to be open and to be trusted in relationships because you're secure. You know what I mean? Within yourself, you had a secure relationship or a secure attachment with your with your parents. But not everybody has that. If some people had, you know, anxious attachment style, whereby the parent was maybe unstable, a bit volatile, and so being in their presence caused them to be anxious because they never knew who they were gonna get, basically. So they built their attachment style. Obviously, has shaped them to act and respond and think in a certain way, and then obviously that shows up in relationships. And then there's the avoidant one. They avoid conflict, they avoid anything that's difficult. Perhaps because they had a very, you know, unstable childhood or whatever it is, so you avoid stuff that's difficult. And so those attachment styles, I find, when I was reading about it, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I find that they obviously can affect how people show up in a relationship. So I think that if someone is secure and has been secure in their attachment with their parents, with their family, then it'd be easier for them to be vulnerable. Whereas if someone's anxious, has an anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment style, it's not as easy for them to do that. So I think there's so many elements to it. It's such a big topic that, you know, I think that, you know, there's a lot to cover. There's a lot to cover. But I'm keen to hear from you guys. Is there anything else you guys want to share on this topic? So the first question was, can a relationship survive without vulnerability? Second question is, what does vulnerability look like in a relationship? I'm going to see if I think I copied some of the responses to this in my story. Okay, someone said actually at some point vulnerability is needed to go deeper, but if it's a superficial relationship, then no, you don't really need it. So yeah, I think we talked about the different relationships we're discussing. Really is committed relationships is what we're talking about. This is actually a bit wonky. Yeah, it's committed relationship that we're talking about, but yeah, it's been great to chat once again. Questions with Nyime live, woohoo! So unless there's any other comments, then I'm gonna wrap it up here. We've been on for about 30 minutes now. Time just flies when you're having fun or when you're talking. Time just flies. I think in order to have a successful long-term relationship, vulnerability is needed. I am inclined to agree with that. I really am. I don't know if I talked about my response to the person that said you don't need vulnerability in a relationship to survive. I think I said something along the lines of, obviously, if whatever you're concealing, you're not being open about, is affecting the way that you relate to your family, to your spouse, to your partner, then I do think it's worth developing the tools to share a little bit, just for there to be understanding. I think understanding is really key in relationships as well, kind of seeing it from the other person's perspective, because we're all different, we're all raised differently, different experiences, and then when you come together in a relationship, there's all sorts of positive things that you bring, there's also baggage that you bring into relationship, and so I think understanding is very, very helpful. Yes, vulnerability is a big one, but you've explored it really nicely. Oh, thanks, Rashida. Thanks for being here. Conversations like this are so valuable. Yeah, they are. They really, really are. And, I'm really hoping the conversation continues past the live. We're going to be exploring intimacy and all that, like, in the next few days. Although my next live won't be Friday, unfortunately. It'll be Thursday evening, because Friday I'm rehearsing for my show on Saturday. So if you're about on Saturday and you live in the London area, please get your tickets. It's the Rebirth launch event. 25th of Feb. Is it Saturday? Yeah, 25th of Feb. This Saturday at, I think it's Tramway Christian Fellowship. But it's definitely on my page. I've pinned it to the top of my profile. So if you can get your tickets, that would be great. But yes, if there's no more comments, I'm going to jump off here and let everybody get to their evening. Like, you get to your evening. Yes. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate, sis. But yes, so wrapping up this conversation or these questions with Nyime live. Thank you for joining. I hope you got something out of the conversation. And yes, excuse my lovely son who came in. I can't believe it. I actually could hear him knocking, and I'm like, I hope he doesn't come in. But then, yeah, he came in and he's like trying to, yeah, anyway. So yeah, take care. I'll see you on the next live. It should be Thursday at 8:30. Take care. Bye.